Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Dworkin. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, January 22nd, 2020. Day 2, I guess, sort of, kind of the Trump impeachment trial. I don't know whether Republicans count yesterday as the day of the impeachment trial or not. They were complaining bitterly that things haven't even started yet. Of course, after, how long did they spend on the floor yesterday? I guess they got started around 1 o'clock, and what did they go to? I didn't even know. I gave up at some point I think probably on the last amendment that they brought up for debate. A very clever one, but I think they took them until, 1, 2 in the morning. And so as a result, I guess, programming note, though despite all the wild promises I have made on behalf of Joan McCarter regarding her appearance here, Greg, thanks very much, 11 hours on the floor yesterday. Of course, Joan would have covered much, if not all, of that 11 hours and is a little fatigued today and will be reporting for work slightly later than usual with the permission of the Daily Kos World Headquarters team. No permission sought, none granted here at the Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters team. We're up. I'm up until 2 in the morning all the time. And up and on the air at 9 with no problem. But then again, I don't have to leave my house to do it. She doesn't have to leave her house to do this either. But she does, much more serious work than I do. Anyway, this is a long way of saying we absolutely understand and forgive her if she has to sleep in a little bit and doesn't really have her wits about her, although I was very excited about having her on the air, especially after screwing up. This is what all of this stems from, my completely screwing up the new schedule, wherein we were to have Joan join us on Tuesdays. But it turns out, for one thing, we went rogue and talked to Armando. And I mean, at some point, how can you not, right? Okay, so we did that, and that, of course, got in the way of Joan coming on, but she was actually commenting yesterday. This works out better. It's a very busy morning there at the Daily Kos World HQ getting ready for the trial. I imagined, though, that today would be even busier, so I don't know how it's going to go. But she said maybe tomorrow would be better. Now, having sat through 11 hours of floor fights signifying nothing, essentially, we'll summarize it for you. There was a lot to take away from it, but accomplishing nothing in the end. But nothing was likely to be accomplished, so we knew that. Anyway, with that under her belt, we would totally understand if she's just going to have to skip it again. And it will be okay, and we'll see her. You won't be without Joan McCarter's insight. You'll just have to get it in written form over on the Daily Kos side of the operation. Greg Dworkin, by all indications, is awake and looking things up. He's got his stories. He's just looking up the answers to my questions and ready to start. Clever work yesterday. I guess that last amendment that I finally gave up on. I gave up listening just because I had been there for hours as it was, and I knew what the result was going to be. But a very clever amendment, and as a matter of fact, I think David Neer commented on it and summed it up nicely, and I grabbed his tweet for those purposes. He was pointing out the last amendment, I think it was the last one, slightly different from all the others. The others asking for specific witnesses and documents, and we can talk a little bit, if you like, about why they did it the way they did it. But the last amendment was a cool one, basically saying that if the Trump defense team tries to admit document A, so that had been requested by subpoena, that also subpoenaed documents B through Z, examples, right? If you ask for 20 documents and they say, we'll admit the first document, but not the other 19, this amendment that they debated at the end and lost on was to change the rules such that all the documents pursuant to a given subpoena, you either accept the documents that were subpoenaed by this subpoena or none of them. You can't, no picking and choosing, no cherry picking from among the documents subpoenaed. So, of course, that didn't fly, but it was a clever turn and a good idea. It was clever all over, really, that they had this fight. We knew that the Democrats were going to, but it seemed for all the world like the Republican defense team really thought we were going to do a 2-hour thing on all the witnesses and all the documents all at once, just like the underlying rule sought to do. And no, we wanted to talk to people about what happened and what the president did. So does Greg Dworkin, so I guess I ought to let him try it. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. So let me tell you one thing, but if you don't like the other 19 things I'm going to tell you, just mute me.
Yes, okay. I think we can overrule you. 53-47.
Yeah, or invoke cloture or something.
Yeah.
The idea is basically, and I do want to talk about primary stuff and some recent polling.
Oh, all right.
But we'll do that after the break. I think the impeachment stuff is obviously primary.
So
the idea was initially, in the beginning, when Mitch McConnell created the rules, the idea was that the Democrats would only have 2 days, and they'd have to get everything in right away. So they had to have their arguments lined up. And what they decided to do was to present it in such a way that not only made the case as for why we need these documents, even though there's overwhelming evidence, by summarizing what their case was going to be just in case they got cut off, because they figured they would be. And then it went to 3 days.
They would be. Yeah.
And the rules changed, as you pointed out. And the Democrats, because of their strategery, were ready for it. And the Trump defense team was not. So they had to wing a lot of it and made up stuff as they went along.
Yeah.
Which I think you could best see probably when one of them, and I can't even remember which one it was. It wasn't Cipollone.
Hard to tell.
Al Demings was talking about a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, a FOIA lawsuit, and he saw it or heard it as a lawyer lawsuit, and just started winging a soliloquy about what that meant.
Yeah, I think that might
even though
it
had no meaning, and that's not what she said, but he literally didn't have anything else to say.
Yeah, that was a really strange thing. I was wondering about that myself, and I think it was Jay Sekulow.
Jay Sekulow, thank you.
AKA Simpson's lawyer guy.
Right.
And he I guess the reporters have come to the conclusion, having searched through the record, that, Sekulow heard her say FOIA lawsuits and thought she said lawyer lawsuits, and that outraged him because, I don't know.
Because he had to play being outraged. Anyway, it went extremely well for the Democrats and not so well for the Republicans from the point of view of presenting this. And let me just start by giving you a short Rick Wilson tweet storm, which kind of summarized a lot of it, I think, in terms of what it all means.
All right.
Okay. So he says, I'll summarize for the slow learners in the Senate one last time. You're going to moo and walk into the chute like cattle, terrified of Trump and Mitch. So when you're underwater in the polls, drowning in public anger at becoming accessories to Trump's cover-up, here's a handy list of what went wrong. Clip and save for later.
Okay.
Here's a partial list. A, the facts of Ukraine will never, ever get better for Trump. You know this. B, truth outs. Okay. Bolton's book hits. Documents leak. More people come forth. C, Trump admits it. You know he will. D, the polls aren't going your way. D, continue. 2/3 of the American people want to see evidence and witnesses. Support for impeachment is steady. We've talked about that on the show. We've looked at the tracker polls. Yes. The Daily Cause Civics polls up to 8 points. The poll that never moves actually moved a little. The McConnell strategy looks great in the short term as a D.C. clever process story, but in a few months looks like a massive cover-up. Mm-hmm. The locked room, one camera, dead of night game you voted for looks more and more like the work of co-conspirators, not judges. Trump won't help you later. His loyalty is to himself. If you're in trouble, even for helping him, you are dead meat. Now, even if he does help you, does it help you? Trump rally fever plays only to the reddest red audiences, like Maine and Arizona. Oh, wait. Mitch only has so much money to spend around. Sure, in January he's saying, I got you, but does he have enough? And even Mitch will flip if the majority's in danger. And how are you going to walk that back? You won't get a second chance to be strong and do the right thing. You won't get another moment to show you give a damn about something bigger than Trump's rage. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, I got a great Arizona newspaper editorial to give you. Voters hate corruption. See 1974, 1980, 1994, 2006. That's just a few examples in recent memory, and they hate its enablers more. It reinforces their existing feelings about politics and politicians, and Trump gets passes you never, ever will. I voted against witnesses and evidence and covered up Trump's crimes of obstruction, lying, and abuse of power so he wouldn't tweet mean things about me is a crap political obituary. And so is I didn't want a primary. Oh, by the way, everything Trump touches dies. So yes. Proceed accordingly.
All right.
All right. So those are his points about that. Now, here is this editorial, just to give you an idea. It's from the Courier, the Eastern Arizona Courier.
Oh, my favorite.
And it's
Courier.
entitled Editorial Profiles in Cowardice. On this page a few weeks ago, before we announced it, we endorsed the idea of Governor Ducey appointing Martha McSally to fill the U.S. Senate seat left vacant by the death of John McCain. McSally, we argued, seemed a politician that focused on common sense solutions. Since her appointment, she's impressed us by visiting Graham and Greenlee multiple times.
Oh, nice.
Something Sinema has never done, not even during the campaign, and by listening to locals about the issues we face here in southeastern Arizona.
Southeastern Arizona. Okay. Visualizing. Okay.
Okay. Her voting record hasn't exactly mirrored her rhetoric when she's here, such as voting with the White House to move funding from military bases such as Fort Huachuca.
Huachuca, probably. I have to take a look at it. All right.
In favor of building a border wall. She's also voted in favor of cutting medical coverage for those with pre-existing conditions. These are policy issues with which we disagree, but disagreeing over policy is how our government should operate. And then there was last Thursday. Okay, and for those of you who didn't hear the story, it's a really interesting story. While walking to a conference room, McSally was asked a question by CNN reporter Manu Raju. Senator McSally, should the Senate consider new evidence as part of the impeachment trial? McSally's response was, to say the least, surprising. Manu, you're a liberal hack. I'm not talking to you. Raju's question was fair, says the editorial. Given the Democrats' push for evidence witnessed at the impeachment trial, other Republican senators hadn't continued to respond to the question, virtually all in opposition, explaining why he or she holds the view. Again, it's reasonable to disagree with policy. What's not reasonable is name-calling like a third grader on the playground. McSally herself released a video to one of her staffers, recorded the exchange, a recording that started well before Raju asked the question, which makes us think that McSally's response was pre-planned no matter what Raju was going to ask. And given that McSally video was immediately used for fundraising and to solicit support from the president, which it did, we tend to think it was all a campaign ploy. After all, McSally's behind Democrat Mark Kelly in the polls and is lagging behind him in fundraising, so she needed to do something. Appealing to the hardcore 30% that supports Trump no matter what evidence turns up or what even he himself says may be her only chance for a Hail Mary win over Kelly. Remember, this is a paper that endorsed her. McSally finds herself in a no-win situation. If she endorses witnesses and new evidence, she loses the Trump base. If she rejects the mountain of new evidence coming out almost hourly about Trump's alleged shakedown of Ukrainian officials for Trump's own political gain, she loses moderates and independents. We thought she was a principled person who would take a position one way or the other and stand up for what she believes is right. Not everybody would agree, but she would choose, and we'd respect her holding to her beliefs, summarizing there.
Yeah, something.
We didn't expect her to be revealed as a political opportunist, willing to debase herself and dismiss her constituency in the dying hopes of holding on to a seat she couldn't win on her own. End of editorial.
Ouch. I mean, you should have expected that, but ow. Nonetheless.
From the paper that endorsed her.
Yeah.
And what I am saying is that all of these senators, especially the Cory Gardners and Susan Collins of the world, are going to find this at home waiting for them.
Yes, and she particularly so. That was a pretty embarrassing thing to get caught on tape. She thought it was fantastic, too, which was really strange. By the way, Fort Huachuca is what
Thank
it
you.
looks like. I've not heard of the thing, and I hadn't seen it spelled. But yeah, Huachuca, Huachuca.
Thank you.
I think.
So,
you're welcome.
So how did it all go? Well, just to remind ourselves, by the rules, they have 24 hours starting this afternoon.
Yes.
So you get the morning off to argue their cases for and against the articles of impeachment. Senators will have 16 hours to ask questions submitted in writing. After that, the Senate will again consider the matter to subpoena witnesses or documents, at which point a few Republicans have signaled they may be open to doing so. We shall see, or whether the whole thing is rigged. Certainly, yesterday's vote was rigged. They announced beforehand that we have solidarity and we're going to vote no on all 11 of these amendments. I think there was 11 or 14. I don't know how many there were.
It's a good number.
I think there was 11 in 11 hours, but the idea was even the so-called Republicans open to considering, end quote, had already announced they're voting with McConnell on this to start. And then we'll see. And I think part of their deal there is to see how it plays. After all, the whole rules change that happened was not expected. Yesterday, what we saw was everything is planned, everything. Oh, my goodness. It was so slapdash and last minute that the rules that they operated on weren't printed. They were handwritten.
Yes. Or
with 2 days crossed out and 3 written in crayon.
Yeah. I think that was that was the rule they were trying to get to a vote on. But
yes.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I'm glad they made the change. That was.
And why did they make the change? All of the reports are saying that Collins and some of the others, unnamed, probably Alexandra and maybe a few others, pushed this because it looks so bad. They had to have it look better. Yeah.
I mean, it really did look kind of dumb, and it was immediately obvious what they were trying to do, and nobody was fooled.
Falling for it, right. And so because of the way that played, they had to change. So the point is, no, they're not totally solid. Yes, they are subject to public pressure. You saw it there. Don't give up.
Yes.
Now, this is Jen Rubin summarizing what happened yesterday. Democrats have already these 4 victories in the impeachment trial.
Yeah.
After a day of irate criticism from Democrats and headlines announcing Republican cover-up, and that is the line, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell modified his proposed trial rules before the impeachment proceedings began on Tuesday, 3 8-hour days instead of 2 12-hour days. And unless objections were raised, you actually get to put all of the evidence that the House has in the record rather than having to agree to put the House evidence in the record by vote. So that was a big change, too. Collins wanted it to be known that she asked for the modifications. Obviously, she was in her interest to say that she got this done. Yes. And you can either choose to believe that or choose to believe McConnell put in some real clunkers so somebody like Collins could ask that they be removed and look good.
Yeah, that's the other theory.
But in either case, it was the first of 4 wins for Democrats on Tuesday when McConnell overreaches.
Yes.
His members might push him to modify his blatantly unfair rules. That's win number 1.
Okay.
The second win came from impeachment manager and House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, who, by the way, got incredible amounts of praise I'll give you in just a minute, who noted the Senate impeachment trials have always had witnesses. As a matter of fact, why don't we summarize some of that now? Here are some tweets. David Rothkopf. The reason the GOP spent so much time vilifying Adam Schiff is because he's so good, so good, so effective. And every insult and lie they spew about him should be seen in that light as an endorsement, as a sign he's doing something very right. Lawrence Tribe. Adam Schiff's opening was magnificent. If you missed it, you owe it to yourself to find and listen to it. Made me proud not just as his teacher, mentor, and friend, but as a lawyer, a professor, and above all, as an American. Now, when Hakeem Jeffries was presenting, Fox News had a chyron up that says, Dems push its hysterical talking points at trial. George Conway said, that's incredible. The manager's presentations have been anything but hysterical. They've been factual, logical, dignified, and compelling.
Yes.
Quinta Jurasek, a hard audience to win over, wrote, so far, I have to say, I'm pretty impressed with how the House managers are doing. They're playing a completely different game than Cipollone et al., but they're doing it very well. True. Maya Wiley says, they brought the receipts. They threw them on the table, and they asked them to be paid.
Yeah,
John
you could
Ford,
see that.
I sat in chamber for the entire Schiff speech. This is a mauling. Trump team thought they were there to debate process, and Schiff ambushed them with a full-throated case for impeachment. Republicans were visibly uncomfortable. Sekulow and Cipollone responses were rambling and bombastic. And Quinn Hillier, who's a conservative Republican, writes for the Washington Examiner, but a never-Trumper, said, so all the Republicans are voting to refuse to hear evidence. They're crooks.
All right.
And even better, again, this is rare praise from a conservative columnist in the Washington Examiner. Hakeem Jeffries was a tour de force, and he gave a series of the best, concise, most forceful explanations of what's at stake. The video of that, which I hope to find and isolate, should be replayed numerous times for the whole country. So that gives you an idea of how this played. And it actually played awfully, awfully well to the public. See, the point was the Democrats don't know how many people are going to watch, how long they're going to watch, but they figured at least for the opening, they'll watch this.
Yeah.
So Schiff in the morning and Jeffries at night summarize the case. And if nobody watches the rest of it, at least they saw that.
Yeah.
And so the second win comes from Jen Rubin. The second win comes from impeachment manager Adam Schiff, who noted the Senate impeachment trials have always had witnesses. He reminded senators that Trump had given a blanket order to refuse to respond to any subpoenas and never actually invoked executive privilege. In his calm and methodical presentation, Schiff scored a victory. Democrats have effectively built the case, again, to the public, whatever the senators do, that the Senate would be guilty of a cover-up if it allows Trump to continue to conceal witnesses and documents. Yep. Third, in identifying the material that Trump and by extension McConnell will not let in, Schiff described in precise detail what some of it would reveal. In other words, he was effectively reading into the record the evidence Trump wants to suppress. Yes. He described documents provided by witnesses that spoke to the halting aid to Ukraine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One way or the other, Schiff will let the public know there's a wealth of incriminating evidence out there that Trump wants to hide with the Senate's help. And fourth, the calm, logic-based, and historically grounded explanations offered by Schiff, and I would add a lot of the other managers too. Zoe Lofgren followed Schiff, and she was great. She was not at all threatening. And having Jerry Nadler go in the wee hours in the morning, which got everybody mad, so that Chief Justice Roberts had to admonish everybody to, stop calling each other liars. It was great to lead off with Schiff and Lofgren and Jason Crow also, in addition to Hakeem Jeffries. They all had great presentations that were aimed at the public. And so you had to listen. The final win, Democrats exposed that the president has no coherent defense, a notion bolstered by the lack of coherent lawyers and absence of serious arguments, arguing about lawyer lawsuits as if that's the most important thing in the world, when in fact nobody ever said that.
Yeah.
So the jury is not really the Senate, it's the public. The defendant isn't Trump, it's the Republican senators. Understanding this, Schiff and I would add et al. Got off to a strong start.
Yes. Everybody did pretty well with their presentations. I thought, so there were some really amazing ones, and I largely agree with how they did. I thought that was interesting that Roberts finally got fed up with it late at night, and maybe it was the hour.
It was 1 a.m, and he's got arguments this morning, which is why there's no trial in the morning.
Tough crap.
He's kind of busy at his day job.
Oh, no. Is Chief Justice of the United States a hard job?
Well, if you have to stay up till 1 a.m. arguing with senators who are falling asleep on you, and then you have to get up and hear arguments at like 9, that's a rough job.
Yeah, you described mine. So
and everybody else. So, if you were a little testy, I would understand it.
No, you wouldn't.
Shut up.
It's possible. Anyway, I guess it was the lateness of the hour, but I will note for the record that, the president's defense team opened up at 1 p.m. with name-calling and nastiness. I was really surprised that there weren't objections.
They were specifically lying about the record. They went on record as saying, and besides, the whole thing is unfair because Republicans weren't allowed into the skit.
Right.
But the documentation provided by the Democrats, the transcript, shows Republicans asking questions. How could they be asking questions if they weren't allowed there?
The television cameras showed it. We all watched it on TV.
I know. It's insane.
I think
I don't know what they were talking about.
I think they just made a mistake. I guess the best possible.
But, I think Hakeem Jeffries at one point, I didn't watch, after 6 p.m., I was just tuning in and out periodically. Mm-hmm. But Hakeem Jeffries said something along the lines of, well, if you didn't know that, now you know that. Yeah. So they did a good job of trying to correct the record there.
I guess
but it was pretty obvious they were lying.
They were,
So Nadler lost his patience and said, you guys are lying.
Yeah.
And Robert said, you guys have to have more decorum.
Don't
address each other, address the seriousness of the chamber and my robes and whatever, and stop. But nobody saw it. It was 1 a.m.
So I guess that helped that it was 1 a.m. But like I said, at 1 p.m., and they started right out. And immediately I thought if it had been a courtroom situation, there probably would have been some objection. They right out of the box. Sekulow right away is immediately accusing the other side of lying and falsifying information.
So Olivia Knox, who's the chief of the White House Correspondents Association, I think tweeted out, so what audience are they addressing? And it was obvious, an audience of one.
Yes. Oh, that's true. They did check off a lot of boxes that made it clear that they were performing for the president, including at some point, I can't remember what it was, but Sekulow or Cipollone jumped up and said some dumb thing that Trump likes to say, and then was immediately like visibly embarrassed and sat down.
Yeah, I think that was Sekulow. So Walter Schaub points out that meanwhile Trump's in Davos. Trump, who obstructed Congress by withholding documents of witnesses this morning, just told reporters in Davos the House doesn't have the evidence. We have all the evidence. Given that one of the charges is obstruction, that's about as brazenly corrupt and cynical as it gets. So, again, the public is seeing this.
Yes.
And, Rick Wilson's right. The payoff isn't going to be now. It's going to be later. So our break is coming up. I just have to throw in, and I'm sorry this happened, but bad news. BBC reports Monty Python star Terry Jones dies at age 77. And that's a terrible thing. But, if you know Terry Jones, he'll just tell you, I'm not really dead.
Yeah, right. That's true.
I'm not dead yet.
That's what it said. Right. All of them can go with that on their tombstones, pining for the fjords, I suppose.
Yeah.
All right.
But in any case, with the break coming up, I think maybe we'll do a little bit of Democratic primary information and news afterwards. But the fact of the matter is, this is about as strong a presentation as you can do, and it went about as well as it can go, considering that you don't have the votes of the gavel.
Right. True. They really took advantage of the opportunity, and I think they caught the Republican team, and that Republican team includes both the Republican jurors who are on the same team as the Republican defense of the president. I don't think that they were anticipating a 12-hour session, and they really didn't know what to do. And I can't.
All the lawyers thought it was a mismatch.
Well, it really was, and it was obvious from the beginning. And really, I thought that they could have objected right off the bat. I found my own tweet from 19 hours ago saying you should be objecting to Sekulow's personal attacks on opposing counsel. Didn't happen until 1 a.m. though, and in reverse. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're trying to figure out the name. What is it? The name for what we're doing here right now?
Yeah, where we interrupt each other playfully and with constructive banter, and it has a formal academic name which now escapes me. We talked about it last week.
Oh, well.
But I'm old and I forget things.
I don't remember things after we talked about
cooperative something.
Colloquy? I don't know.
It's
cooperative.
It's a cooperative interaction or some.
Yes, okay, right. I remember. Yeah, we're not interrupting people. We're doing some.
We're just proving we're listening. That's all.
Yeah. All right, I'll look for that document while you're summarizing everything else. All right, but then
So,
I'll interrupt you.
Let's start off.
I got it.
With how this all plays. What?
No, I'm just kidding. I wanted to interrupt you to do something constructive, and I did something detrimental.
And besides, I'm not interrupting David. I'm just telling him to shut up.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
That's what you do with siblings. So
wait, I got it.
Poll. Donald Trump has ground to make up in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. And this was just published this morning on Cleveland.com. President Donald Trump trails in 4 key Great Lakes states he won in 2016, indicating the extent to which he'll have to entice wavering voters, especially women, to swing his way before November. January polling across Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin found support for a still-to-be-determined Democratic candidate was within a few points of reaching a majority in each state, including leads of more than a dozen points over Trump in Wisconsin and Michigan, according to the Great Lakes poll released Wednesday by Baldwin Wallace University's Community Research Institute, a new pollster for me. Democratic support was softest in Ohio, where the generic Democrat led Trump 44-39. with the rest undecided. In partnership with Ohio Northern and Oakland universities, polled more than 1,000 registered voters in each state. These are RVs, not LVs. That is registered voters, not likely voters.
Okay.
And it doesn't say whether they adjust for education, which is key these days. But women could decide the election as their support for a Democrat over Trump ranged from 11 points in Ohio to 26 points in Michigan. The preference among men was within the margin of error in 3 states and 4 points in the Democrats' favor in Pennsylvania. The economy is the number one issue in Ohio and 2 other states. Healthcare issues lead in Wisconsin, the lone Midwest or Northeast state that didn't expand Medicaid under Obamacare. So keep that in mind.
Yes, okay.
BW, experienced in Ohio polling, chose to concentrate on the 4 states for their new Great Lakes poll to learn more about voters in states regionally that voted for Barack Obama in 2012 and then flipped. Tom Sutton, a professor of political science and director of BW's Community Research Institute, said the views of women were particularly interesting. The difference in women's lack of support for Trump will be critical to the chance of the Democratic nominee winning. And this follows the trend of women supporting Democratic candidates in 2018. This is the first of 4 that will be conducted. And so here are the numbers. In Ohio, 44-39, Trump versus any Democrat. And that's really the bumper sticker, right? Any Democrat 2020.
Yeah.
In Michigan, 46-33. In Pennsylvania, 47-37. And in Wisconsin, 47-34. In each state, there's about 15 to 18% undecided. Okay. Large numbers of undecided leave ample room for Trump support to grow, in theory. And it looks like the Democrats have this huge lead, but if you take into account the people who are undecided, the race is a toss-up in all 4 states, which is a fair way to put it. But the point is, for Trump to win, he'd have to win the bulk of the undecided. And that impeachment stuff yesterday, for example, doesn't help him.
No.
And one of the things that has been remarkable over the last few months, and we've talked about this a little bit on the show, is that if you specifically look at his job approval and you compare it to within the same poll, you want to get rid of him?
Yeah.
You want to get rid of him is usually higher than his job approval. So he lags behind his job approval when it comes to the question of should he get rid of him?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who will look at him and say, yeah, he's doing a fine job. I like the economy, but God, he's got to go.
Okay, I'll take it. If
right.
That's the conclusion.
And so, it's just it's a weird. Here's an example. I think there was a recent Georgia vote, and he's got a good favorability, but Georgia voters say they're more likely to vote against Trump than vote for him, 47-44.
Oh, okay.
In the recent poll. It's just, you see this over and over. This is an AJC poll, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And, you just see it over and over and over again. For example, Brandon on Twitter summarized findings that Tom Edsall had written. We got another Edsall piece to go over. But listen to this, CNN nationally. Job rating, 43, support removal, 51.
Okay.
That's not in the battleground states. Job rating, 47, support removal, 49. Monmouth should have a poll out today, I think. Job rating, 43, removal, 49. And in the battlegrounds, job rating, 38, support removal, 50. So the point is that you can look at him and say, okay, I'm all right with him on the economy. But I still think he needs to go for various and sundry reasons. And once again, the Democratic presentation yesterday hones in on that.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. I guess, well, there's a lot to
for you undecided out there, and there's a lot of undecided, which is why persuasion is so important. Then you need to persuade these. That's different but parallel to, okay, I hate them all. But remember, the last polling I looked at from CNN, when they were looking at Biden in particular, showed a 7-1 lead for Biden over those who can't stand anybody.
Okay. Yeah, I guess so.
The opposite of what happened in 2016. So don't tell me 2016. Get over your PTSD. It's 2020. It's a different situation here.
Yes. Well.
Okay. Yeah. So Well, why doesn't this all work out? How come he's still got that 42-43? Tom Edsall has a nice piece about that, which is nice. And it's entitled, Why Trump Persists. Voters are less tolerant, less empathetic, and less interested in integrity than many political analysts thought. The failure of the American electorate to rise up in opposition to President Trump, whose outrages are well documented, suggests that voters are, in fact, those things: less tolerant, less empathetic, less insistent on integrity. The election of Trump in his first 3 years in office has revealed a nation deeply ambivalent about immigration, race, equality, fairness, even about the ground rules of democracy itself. What if the belief systems used to justify anti-immigrant policies and to justify race prejudice, for that matter, hostility to outsiders, insularity, high sensitivity to external threat, are as deeply ingrained in the American body politic as belief systems sympathetic to immigration and to racial equality, openness, receptivity to new experiences, and trust? Now, if you're a black man reading this or a black woman reading this, you'd say, well, yeah, were you trying to make the case that America has always been fair? Look at
everything.
Look at how people reacted to the New York Times doing a whole series about the racial beginnings of America. People are outraged. You're challenging all of these belief systems about America being, the beacon on the hill, standing for wonderfulness, when in fact it started out in slavery.
Yes.
That's not new.
No.
Well, it's new if you're a white male senior professor who's only looked at it from one specific point of view. It's new.
I guess so.
But in any case,
yes.
Karen Stenner, a political psychologist and behavioral economist best known for predicting the rise of Trump-like figures under the kinds of conditions we now confront, responded to my emailed inquiries by noting the conflicting pressures at play. I don't think I would agree that Trumpian conservative standards on immigration, race, and homelessness are more natural or default. Communities with a good balance of people who seek out diversity, complexity, novelty, new and exciting experiences, and those who are disgusted by and averse to such things, avoid them and tell others to do likewise, tend to thrive and prosper in human evolution. Finding the right balance, she says, is vital to both societal cohesion and human flourishing, but we may have tipped the balance too far in favor of unconstrained diversity and complexity, pushing the boundary behind many people's capacity to tolerate it. Wow. And, she talks about tinkering the balance to get it right for everybody. I would simply step back and say, this is the theoretical discussion about a wall that doesn't exist on the southern border.
All right.
Right? For liberals and academics.
Okay, yes.
And for people to say this is a ridiculous concept, there is no such thing. You're going to take eminent domain. You're going to, upset conservatives. It doesn't work. There's 100 reasons why this doesn't work, but the wall's a symbol. And so if you attack the symbol without addressing the underlying reasons as to why it's such a powerful symbol, then you lose. That's been the point of the conservatives who say, you got to take this immigration stuff seriously. We look at it and say, kids in cages. They look at it and say, but you have to understand why people tolerate that.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's try to understand why people tolerate that. That's the point of this article. Not that it's correct. It's not. And you should be outraged by kids in cages, regardless. Yes. Some people aren't. Right. Why is that? That's what this looks like.
Yeah, they think there's a more noble reason than that.
Not a noble reason, just an explanatory reason.
Oh, well, even so.
There's nothing noble about it, but, practical politics says, fine, you have to deal with it. Susan, it's the kind of thing that says, look, there are persuadable voters, and I'm not going to call the Trump base deplorable, because even if they are, I don't want to turn off those persuadable voters. That is practical politics. It doesn't mean that I'm endorsing the Trump base.
Okay. All right. I mean, there's probably 6 of them.
Well, but if you get those 6 to vote, you win.
Yes.
Suzette Brooks Masters, who's written extensively about immigration, integration, detention, employment-based immigration, immigrants' rights field generally, made a parallel point in her recent study. Academics agree it's the pace of change relative to the composition of the receiving community that matters most. Simply put, if a place is already diverse, making it more diverse doesn't matter, but matters less. Even significant inflows of diverse newcomers will be perceived as less threatening because the community has already adapted to greater diversity. That's like saying, Texas, you're going to see more Hispanic Latino voters.
Yeah.
We know. Do you live here? Do you know anything about our state? Whereas if you say that in, let's say, North Dakota, a different response. By contrast, in a relatively homogeneous location, even small absolute numbers of newcomers, such as refugees, can be disruptive and activate cultural anxiety. Okay. In the political arena, John Haidt says, if one gains prestige for outdoing others on one's devotion to sacred values, such as guarding America's borders on the right or being anti-racist on the left, then the party's rhetoric will shift to the extremes, with candidates making more extreme proposals that gain them prestige. The pressure to go extreme are roughly symmetrical between left and right. I don't believe that, but that's what he says. John R. Hibbing, political scientist at the University of Nebraska, takes a more uncompromising stance and says, though consideration of such matters is always speculative, suggesting the possibility that conservative orientations, particularly on topics such as immigration and race, are evolutionarily more primal, is perfectly reasonable.
All right.
If the environment shifts back to a threat-filled atmosphere, then positive selection for conservative orientations would reappear. The point he's trying to make is that if, for right or wrong reasons, if you truly believe that your particular view of this is threatened, then you're going to circle the wagons and become tribal and say my tribe versus your tribe, and that's really the only thing that matters, and that's going to predominate.
Okay.
And that's what's happening in the Senate right now with Republicans. It's got nothing to do with logic. It's got nothing to do with facts in the case. It's that you're threatening a Republican majority, and so we're circling the wagons, and that's why we will let Mitch McConnell decide everything for us. It's not that we're robots, but we truly believe our Republican majority is threatened. That's why I started with the Rick Wilson piece.
Okay.
He's got news for them. This ain't going to help you.
Yeah.
But the reason why they're doing it is crystal clear.
Yes, it's a bad reason.
It's a bad reason, but it's crystal clear what that reason is.
Yeah, I guess it is. Meanwhile, I was just thinking, well, maybe I help you in your effort to reach out to persuadables by holding out the threat that what could be happening instead is that my theory of putting all of you in cages and seeing how you like it might prevail. But you've just been saved by reasonable Greg Dworkin, and don't you want to vote for him?
Yeah, or at least this candidate. One scholar who's devoted much of his career to the study of the transition in developed countries from materialist to post-materialist values, from value orientation that emphasizes economic and physical security to one that emphasizes self-expression and quality of life, is Ronald Englehart, professor of political science at the University of Michigan, and sees a generalized transition to more liberal worldviews, perhaps as a concomitant of voters with college and graduate school degrees. And that is why you have to adjust your polling for education. Liberal values are not a veneer masking a much less pleasant reality. A sizable and growing segment of the American public has tolerant liberal views, and these views are deep-rooted and enduring, which of course gets all the white evangelicals very angry. Englehart's research has found that those who develop post-materialist views, which strongly correlate with what you think is liberal values, in their pre-adult years remain relatively post-materialist 40 years later. So the Republicans losing a generation right now is going to have impact for them. It isn't just a question of demography is destiny. It's that if you chase away younger generations when they get older, they don't vote for you. That's another fallout from what the Republicans are doing right now in Congress. So from 1970 to the present, the ratio of materialist to post-materialist has gone from 4 to 1 to 1 to 1. That is to say, economic anxiety has gone from 4 to 1 to 1 to 1. Ryan Enos, a political scientist at Harvard, whose research has demonstrated the precariousness of liberal racial comments when tested in real-world circumstances, replied by email to my inquiries, there's no doubt there's more ambivalence on these issues among liberals and moderates than is reflected in the polls. Others will lie to themselves, telling themselves they believe something they really don't. Others are liberal in theory, but less so in practice when it comes to things like homelessness in their own city or neighborhood, NIMBY and that kind of thing about housing. So, if black voters don't always trust white voters and they decide to vote for Biden because he's the devil they know, not the devil they don't, they're all bad, but at least he'll be beholden to them, which is what other comments have been. You can understand that. So these are sources of internal tension and conflicting interests among Democrats and liberals. Another thing that Edsall has written about is the upstairs-downstairs Democratic coalition and how fragile that is. You have well-educated, relatively affluent voters, disproportionately white, with poor and working-class voters who are heavily minority. And they don't always have the same interests. And the upstairs people have to vote for the interests of the downstairs people, or the coalition falls apart. Yes. That's why, for example, if you're running in Florida as a Democrat, you better pay attention to what Hispanic, Latino, Haitian, and other minority voters want and need, and not just vote your own interest.
Yes.
Right? You have to do that in order, because the coalition has to go both ways. And the flip side of that coin is you can't motivate non-voters unless you're offering them something. You can't scare them into voting.
Right. Okay.
So, it's just an interesting article overall in terms of different points of view that people have to take into consideration. There's times you can't convince people. You simply have to outvote them. I get that. And there's times that a base election with a referendum on the president, which is what 2020 will be, will overshadow all of that. But you're always best off if you can disarm your opponents as best as possible and not deliberately stir them up, which is why the deplorable remark played so poorly in 2016, true though it might have been, and why you have to do your best to continue to persuade without abandoning your own base. In the upstairs-downstairs term, you got to make sure that everybody in the House, has a reason to vote for you. Yes. Everybody. So, whoever could do that best winds up winning the Democratic primary, and I don't know who that'll be, but we'll know in 2 weeks who gets Iowa, maybe, in 3 different ways. And, it's Iowa's less than 2 weeks away. So,
well, good, because I'm tired of it already.
Yeah, pretty much.
But I was always tired of Iowa. I'm sorry. People are lovely. Be nice to visit. Probably maybe in the spring, which is when they should maybe think about having their primary. But
right. So with all of that as a prelude,
yes.
Morning Consult with their new post-debate poll: Biden 29, Sanders 24, up 1, Warren 15, up 1, Bloomberg 10, up 2, Buttigieg 8, Yang 4, minus 1. Klobuchar 3, Steyer 3, minus 1. So Steyer and Bloomberg, Bloomberg's doing better than Steyer in terms of buying your way in. Yeah. Pete Buttigieg continues to not do so well, and Yang is fading. And there's no incredibly big Klobuchar move here, although you might see that in Iowa and the early states, even if you don't see it nationally. The other national poll that's out is good for Bernie. This is CNN out this morning. 27% of registered voters who are Democrats or Democratic-leaning independents back Sanders, 24% Biden. The margin between the two is within the poll's margin of error, so you can say that they both lead, and they both lead everybody else by a big margin, but this is the first time Bernie's actually been on top.
Okay, well.
So, pick your adventure, pick your poll. We really don't know what's going on here. There's still a lot in flux. There's a lot of people who still haven't made up their mind. And again, as satisfying as it is for Jerry Nadler to tell the Trump White House legal team they're lying, John Roberts is a good example of how it doesn't always play well, even if you're correct. So you're better off doing the Hakeem Jeffries thing. You may not have known this, but now you do.
I guess so.
That's a much better way of saying the same thing.
Yeah, I guess so. Know your audience, I suppose. And I mean, the fact that he sat there like a rock for 10 hours.
Remember, you're running in the Midwest here.
I guess so. I mean, honestly, the first 10 hours
you got to be
different.
Midwest nice.
I guess so. So that's a note to self. That Roberts will sit through that kind of thing.
Practice your passive aggressive
till midnight, and then at 1 o'clock he'll get upset about it. All right, or send him a snack. I guess that might work.
That was a really interesting presentation. Bless your heart.
Yeah, right. Do that. Exactly. That's how it works.
That's how it works.
Interesting. Okay. Well.
Anyway, that's my my rant for today. Okay. I'm sorry I was so busy ranting I didn't have a chance to interrupt you as often as I like, but there it is.
I kept trying to start, and you would interrupt my beginning, so it worked.
Even before you started.
Yeah, you were so on it.
I know you so well. You were going to say something, but I think I'll interrupt you even before you do.
Every time I breathe in, you just go. Okay. Very good.
Anyway, that's good. We'll be back tomorrow.
Okay.
And we'll do it again, and we'll have some other interesting things to say, I hope.
We think we'll try it anyway, and we'll see whether the people in the impeachment trial say anything interesting, too.
Yes. So see you tomorrow, and, great show. Bless your heart.
Oh, okay. Thanks so much. All right. See you tomorrow. All right. We'll see what happens between now and then. Interesting watching, I guess, the ban on photography on the Senate floor during the impeachment trial has led to some interesting results. I guess they have the Courtroom Sketch Artists Full Employment Act going here. There are people, who specialize in these things. In that weird segment of our government in the judicial branch where they still, in some places, and there are a lot of them, prohibit photography, and we still have those courtroom sketch artists. They've been working on the Senate floor today, and I just saw one come by that I have a hard time believing. I'm not even certain. Now I really want photography to verify whether this is really true. Doug Andres is the origin of this tweet. Is Doug... okay, he's the press secretary for Mitch McConnell. And he's circulating this sketch. Did they credit the sketch? Yeah, here, it's in the corner. I got to turn my head because they put it sideways here. Sketches by Bill Hennessy. So Bill Hennessy is the courtroom sketch artist guy who put this one together in the courtroom of the Senate of Senator Marco Rubio. You know who he is. At the Senate impeachment trial yesterday. And unless he's embellishing this thing, he's got Rubio at his desk taking notes or writing something. I mean, he might be writing a pizza order for all I know. But he's using like a quill pen or a quill style pen is what it looks like. And people having a good laugh about that. I suppose, well, that'd be interesting. I guess if I had to sit at one of those desks, I might get something like that. I enjoy the weird pens. I've got a little fountain pen that I keep around here. It's kind of fun to write with. I don't know whether he's got a real quill pen or one of those fake quill pens, like with a ballpoint tip to it, but it has the feather on the back that you can get at the souvenir stores. I think you can get one of those quill pens down at the gift shop, the Capitol gift shop. You can buy parchment paper, like aged-looking parchment paper, and one of those quill pens and some ink in an inkwell that you can fool around with when you buy a souvenir copy of the Constitution or something like that. Maybe that's what he's done. He's having a good time with it. That's nice. What have you sent me here? Greg sent one more article, I guess maybe in response from this. Igor Bobich tweeting this around, a photo. Exclusive look from our sketch artist inside the room, says Igor, and I guess featuring the joke sketch of the Huffington or the HuffPost thing. It says must credit HuffPost. Drawn on United States Senate Press Gallery stationery, a stick figure collection. Drawn from the gallery behind the rostrum, and not often used galleries. So well worth taking a look at. I'll retweet it around there. I guess I should. Let's mark it and throw it into the summary as well. Now you just send something else too, right? No. Okay, the separate of the picture of it along. It comes up nicely in Igor's tweet too. So all right, people having fun with that old-fashioned technology. All right, coming up on the end of our first hour and into the mystery second hour, during which we may, if we're lucky, hear from Joan if she's awake and really feeling refreshed, which I tend to doubt just because of how late the hour was. But, maybe she could come in and say, I'm very tired because last night sucked. It was the worst, or whatever. If not, we can see about a make good on another day, or we'll live. I don't want to pressure you. You've been working hard for us, and we'll work hard for you. It doesn't bother us. Okay, let's see where to go with this one. Let's see. Oh yeah, minor moment of controversy in primary land yesterday, as Hillary Clinton apparently told everybody what she really thought about Bernie Sanders, and that upset a lot of people. I presume chiefly Bernie Sanders people, although there were probably a lot of Hillary Clinton favoring people who, of course, she's not running this time, so they're looking for a different candidate who were probably like, we could have done without. We understand. you don't like Bernie. You may even have good reason to not like him personally, and that's the way it is. But I guess she pulled back from that. I want to mention it, and I've got a reference to a story here from our friend Jack Ox, who sends us the L.A. Times opinion piece. Democrats were, well, what's the headline on this one? Let's take a look at it. Democrats looked ready to unify, and then Hillary Clinton had to go and raise her hand. So I guess Melissa Batchelor Warnke, the contributor of this piece, very upset with her speaking up. By the end of the day, she had largely said, but the fact of the matter is, in case anybody was still wondering, I'll back just about anybody for the Democratic nomination against, whoever the nominee is, against Donald Trump. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it's worth our time at this point to even examine it, or do we let it fade away? Will it fade away? For some of us it won't, I guess. But the part of the primaries that I didn't even know there was this part of the primaries where you have the primary over again the next time, even when you're not a candidate. That's my new part of the primaries that I hate the most, is having the old primary happen again. I didn't like it the first time, and I like it even less the second time, particularly when one of you isn't running, and it makes even less sense. But noted for the record, I guess we'll say, as we head off into our second break, though that might not be sufficient admonishment for Hillary Clinton, for people who are angry with her for speaking up. I don't really know what to do with it. I mean, on the one hand, I like honesty, I guess. On the other hand, I guess I like honesty from people who are running for office. And if you're not, well, I don't know. I guess I'm supposed to like honesty from whatever source. Okay, well, all right. So a little dose of honesty. And honestly, I'd like to see if we can't get past it after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see, a couple of items that deserve at least brief mention. I'm not certain how much substance there is in this report, but that'll be good because we can just raise the fact that it happened and move on from there. American Oversight put out a release last night. Apparently, another tranche of OMB records have been released relating to the Ukraine assistance funding. I know this thanks to the headline, OMB records related to Ukraine assistance funding. Up at the top, records from OMB in response to American Oversight's request for directives and communications that may relate to any effort to pressure the Ukrainian government to investigate one of President Trump's political opponents. Do you know which one? As part of an effort to give the president an electoral advantage. That's about as dry as you can put it. It includes let's see, what is this? This is a letter to American Oversight from the OMB, from the FOIA officer responding, and then including, I guess, 192 pages of responsive documents. I think people are parsing through it at the moment. It came late last night or early this morning. And I'm sure that people on Twitter are pulling pieces of it out that are particularly interesting. I've seen a few people, but most of them are heavily redacted. So the good stuff isn't out there yet. We'll have to wait and see whether Just Security somehow magically manages to get hold of unredacted versions of these things that will make them more interesting. But if you have anything, or you have seen anybody else tweet something that you think is a particularly useful or insightful nugget, please by all means send it along and we can share it with everybody. But I think it's going to be another couple of hours, probably between now and 1 p.m. when the trial restarts. People will spend their time parsing through these things and tweeting around the hottest bits. But that's out there if you're looking for something to do. Another story, I was going to say unrelated, but it's hard not to see the relationship between this and so many other stories we've seen. But this causing a lot of buzz as well. Let's see. Maybe I'll start with the tweet that brought it to my attention and then move to the article, and that will be our long read for the day. Chris Bing, pointing this out, Reuters cybersecurity reporter, says he's got the report of The Guardian, which, what's their headline over at The Guardian? Let's open that up. Jeff Bezos hack. It's kind of ironic that, like, king of the internet gets hacked, but, you know, he wasn't a cybersecurity guy or anything. Jeff Bezos hacked Amazon boss's phone, hacked by Saudi crown prince. That does cause a bit of a stir because, of course, the story is that when they say his phone was hacked by the Saudi crown prince, you might think, well, okay, so the Saudis had their people, you know, hack Bezos's phone. But it's more than that. It's, well, according to this report and according to this tweet from Chris Bing about this report, Bezos was in a WhatsApp chat with Saudi's MBS, Mr. Bonesaw, when unprompted, the Crown Prince himself, they're chatting on WhatsApp, the Crown Prince himself sent him a random file. The file, it appears, contained malware which allowed Bezos' phone to be hacked, leading to leaks of photos designed to embarrass him. Remember that story, of course, and the leak of those photos. What was missing from the story was exactly how the hack happened and what the heck happened, I guess. And I don't know what to tell you. For one thing, I'm amazed. The real blockbuster, of course, is I'm amazed that MBS himself is in the chat with him and just sends him this file, like brazenly, here, have this malware file that allow me to hack your phone. I guess I'm equally surprised that Internet King Jeff Bezos opens it. But I guess on the other hand, if you're Jeff Bezos, bazillionaire, and you get a file from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, you say, ordinarily, I wouldn't open an unknown file sent to me unbidden, but the usual rule is, don't open any files that are sent to you unbidden by people you don't know, for sure. Although, frankly, don't open anything that isn't identified, or, at least that somebody, a good hacking practice would be to make a claim that it was something else. Rickroll people into opening malware instead of just sending it without any message, because that's kind of an automatic, that's a tip off, even if you know the person, that if you're being generous, that's a tip off that the person that you're talking to who sent you this file has been hacked and someone else is controlling their computer and using it to send out these unidentified files, so that you'll say things like, my friend, the murderer, he wasn't the murderer yet, but this is what we're looking at in hindsight now, right? My friend, the murderer from, who owns Saudi Arabia, has sent me this file, and I trust him because he's a murderer in charge of a whole country. He's got a personal compound that's the size of a nation and pretends to be one. Well, all right. There's a lot of reasons not to open it. But again, maybe this is why this is a good reason. This is justification for why I tell you, stop thinking of Saudi Arabia as like a regular country with a government and everything. He's a very rich guy who lives in a weird, spooky compound with serfs. And we should remember that. And maybe that would lead you to say things to yourself like, although he is, for some reason, treated as a respected personage around the world in elite circles, etc. You have to remember he's also a murderer, or a potential murderer, at least at that point, and maybe a hacker as well. And don't open things just because he's a wealthy guy, and you figure a wealthy guy would never do that to another wealthy guy. Of course they would. How do you think they stay wealthy? There's murderers all over the place among these wealthy people. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking by it. So here's the Guardian story, which has actual facts, and they had to run by a lawyer and everything, so they don't have to wait for me to speculate about these things. Exclusive, it says here, thanks to Stephanie Kirschgassner, I'm guessing is how you would say that. Extraordinarily long Germanic surname. Exclusive, investigation suggests Washington Post owner, that's Bezos, was targeted 5 months before the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which all comes in here. I'm not just kidding around. I'm not kidding when I say they murdered Jamal Khashoggi, obviously, and that MBS is a murderer himself. But they didn't know that yet. They hadn't murdered him yet. So you wonder, well, what was the motivation to even do this? Anyway, revealed here, it says, the Saudi heir and the alleged plot to undermine Jeff Bezos. Good job doing that, by the way. He's really poor now. The Amazon billionaire Jeff Bezos had his mobile phone hacked, and it puts that in scare quotes, in 2018 after receiving a WhatsApp message that had apparently been sent from the personal account of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, sources have told The Guardian. The encrypted message from the number used by Mohammed bin Salman is believed to have included a malicious file that infiltrated the phone of the world's richest man, according to the results of a digital forensic analysis. This analysis found it highly probable, that in quotes too, that the intrusion into the phone was triggered by an infected video file sent from the account of the Saudi heir to Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post. The two men had been having a seemingly friendly WhatsApp exchange, and that's a good cover for these things, when on May 1st of that year, the unsolicited file was sent, according to sources who spoke to The Guardian on condition of anonymity. Large amounts of data were exfiltrated from Bezos' phone within hours, according to a person familiar with the matter. The Guardian has no knowledge of what was taken from the phone or how it was used. The extraordinary revelation that the future king of Saudi Arabia may have had a personal involvement in the targeting of the American founder of Amazon will send shockwaves from Wall Street to Silicon Valley, the only two important places, I guess, in the United States. It could also undermine efforts by MBS, as the Crown Prince is known, to lure more Western investors to Saudi Arabia. I would say so. Where he has vowed to economically transform the kingdom even as he has overseen a crackdown on his critics and rivals and murdered them. That's not in there, but it should be. The disclosure is likely to raise difficult questions for the kingdom about the circumstances around how U.S. tabloid, the National Enquirer, came to publish intimate details about Bezos' private life, including text messages 9 months later. It may also lead to renewed scrutiny about what the Crown Prince and his inner circle were doing in the months prior to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist who was killed in October 2018, 5 months after the alleged hack of the newspaper's owner. I don't know if the two are even related. I mean, they might have been looking for... Do you think they thought that they would find information on Khashoggi in Bezos' phone? I suppose it's possible. He owns the Post. Khashoggi wrote for the Post. But it seems like there are other phones that you should have hacked, could have hacked, should have hacked to get that information. But maybe it was coincidental. Or again, I mean, if you're smart, they should be saying, MBS should be saying, my phone was hacked. And that I sent it to everybody because I didn't do it. I was hacked, and I got one of those programs that sent that file to every one of my contacts. Of course, I guess that's provable or disprovable. But why not lie and then threaten to murder everybody if you can? Saudi Arabia has previously denied it targeted Bezos' phone. That's gone by the wayside, I guess, and has insisted the murder of Khashoggi was the result of a rogue operation. That's the problem. In December, a Saudi court convicted 8 people of involvement in the murder, except for the guy who ordered it, after a secret trial that was criticized as a sham by human rights experts, like we're having now in the Senate, except for the opposite reason. Digital forensic experts started examining Bezos' phone following the publication last January by the National Enquirer of intimate details about his private life. The story, which included his involvement in an extramarital relationship, set off a race by his security team to uncover how the CEO's private texts were obtained by the supermarket tabloid, which was owned by American Media Incorporated, which is, of course, the same folks who were helping Donald Trump do the catch and kill stories. So like I said, everything's kind of connected, yada, yada. By the way, I'm already forgetting the note I wanted to make to myself, but what was the relation in this story to something that happened at the trial yesterday? Yes. Sham on human rights. Reminded me of the complaint. I forget which of the managers was making this point, But, and I know this is a weird diversion to make, but I guess before I forget, but somebody made the excellent point that the Ukrainians very quickly, of course, caught on to what we were doing with withholding their aid. But that I guess at some point in regular, normal diplomatic relations between our countries, one of our foreign affairs, one of our State Department officials, discussing issues with the Ukrainians and warning them against, I guess, a then planned prosecution of one of the officials in a previous Ukrainian administration, of prosecuting them for corruption and warning them, essentially, yeah, it looks bad prosecuting your former political rivals after the fact, and you shouldn't do it in the interest of, your standing in the world. And, of course, the problem is that the argument had been entirely undermined because the Ukrainians shot back immediately. Oh, you mean like the one that you're asking us to do for you now on Biden and the 2016 election? And, yeah, good point. So just a good illustration of how badly we've undermined American credibility with Trump's stunts. But now back to the story of Jeff Bezos being hacked. The story in American Media Incorporated, is that right? Is that what the I is there? All right. Well, anyway, the story, yes, which included his involvement in the extramarital relationship, etc., right, sets off the race by his security team to try to figure out how this happened, while AMI insisted it was tipped off about the affair by the estranged brother of Bezos' girlfriend. That was the excuse, I recall that. The investigation by the billionaire's own team found with high confidence that the Saudis had managed to access Bezos' phone and had gained private information about him. Bezos' head of security, Gavin de Becker, I remember these guys, wrote in the Daily Beast last March he had provided details of his investigation to law enforcement officials, but he didn't publicly reveal any information on how the Saudis accessed the phone. He also described the close relationship the Saudi Crown Prince had developed with David Pecker, the chief executive of the company that owned the Inquirer, in the months before the Bezos story was published. De Becker did not respond to calls and messages from The Guardian this time around. The Guardian understands a forensic analysis of Bezos' phone, and the indications that the hack began with an infected file from the Crown Prince's account have been reviewed by Agnes Callamard, the UN Special Rapporteur who investigates extrajudicial killings. So they're into this for the Khashoggi angle, I guess. It is understood that it is considered credible enough for investigators to be considering a formal approach to Saudi Arabia to ask for an explanation. Callamard, whose own investigation into the murder of Khashoggi found credible evidence the Crown Prince and other senior Saudi officials were responsible for the killing, confirmed to The Guardian she was still pursuing several leads into the murder, but declined to comment on the alleged Bezos link. When asked by The Guardian whether she would challenge Saudi Arabia about the new hacking allegation, she said she followed all UN protocols that require investigators to alert governments about forthcoming public allegations. So in other words, you'll know when they're going to do it before they do it. Saudi experts, dissidents, and analysts told The Guardian they believed Bezos was probably targeted because of his ownership of the Post and its coverage of Saudi Arabia. Khashoggi's critical columns about Mohammed bin Salman and his campaign of repression against activists and intellectuals rankled the Crown Prince and his inner circle. So look out, they'll murder him and hack you. Andrew Miller, a Middle East expert who served on the National Security Council under President Obama, said if Bezos had been targeted by the Crown Prince, it reflected the personality-based environment in which the Crown Prince operates. Not unlike our own president, Donald Trump, right? He probably believed that if he got something on Bezos, it could shape coverage of Saudi Arabia in the Post. It's clear that the Saudis have no real boundaries or limits in terms of what they're prepared to do in order to protect or advance MBS, whether it is going after the head of one of the largest companies in the world or a dissident who is on their own. The possibility that the head of one of America's leading companies was targeted by Saudi Arabia could pose a dilemma for the White House. Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, have maintained close ties with the Crown Prince despite a U.S. intelligence finding, reportedly with medium to high degree of certainty, that Mohammed bin Salman ordered Khashoggi's murder. I don't know why The Guardian thinks that that's going to cause a problem for the White House. I mean, it could cause them a problem. It won't pose a dilemma for them. They know what they'll do. We know what they'll do. They'll take Mohammed bin Salman's side. It doesn't bother them that Khashoggi was living in the United States. They don't care about that. Both Saudi Arabia and AMI have denied the kingdom was involved in the publication of the Bezos story. A lawyer for Bezos, who was contacted by The Guardian, said, "I have no comment on this except to say that Mr. Bezos is cooperating with investigations." Hell, he's conducting his own investigations. The Guardian asked the Saudi embassy in Washington about the claims, did not immediately return a request for comment, but later said on Twitter that suggestions Saudi Arabia was responsible for the hack were absurd. Oh well, too late. I believe them. And included here is that tweet in which they say it's absurd. I guess the quote is, "Recent media reports that suggest the kingdom is behind a hacking of Mr. Jeff Bezos' phone are absurd. We call for an investigation on these claims so that we can have all the facts out." Well, okay. I guess you'll get your wish. That's the end of the article. Important to keep up with. And I guess it does have more of a connection to domestic politics than we would ordinarily have guessed. But I guess you put nothing past MBS at this point, I suppose. Let's see. Other things to share here. Let's see. A few smaller notes here, including... For one thing, hearkening back to Monday's protest/cosplay in Richmond. Very interesting. A couple of good observations made about that one, which, let's see if I can find and properly credit it, and perhaps just note to self to try and find that later. But somebody making the very good point that newspaper coverage of the events in Richmond appear inclined to sum things up by saying, well, as it turns out, everything ended peacefully in Richmond. It turned out to be a peaceful protest, and a good point being made in all of this is it wasn't really a peaceful protest. I mean, they're calling it peaceful because no one got injured or killed. No weapons were fired, and that's really it. But a good point being made by a number of people, and I'll see if I can find the original of it. But I think Will Bunch wrote about it as well, and I might run into his article before I find the person I first saw making this point. But yeah, really doesn't befit events to call it peaceful when the whole premise of the event was that they were all going to show up wearing their biggest guns, and in the end, in fact, ended up intimidating everyone from who might have something else to say about gun laws from attending the lobby day, as they call it, there on the 20th. So people who have different opinions about what we should be doing about guns in this country or in this state were intimidated out of visiting their legislators. Here it is. Here's the original one. To register that opinion with them and to support them in their passage of common sense gun restrictions because all the other people showed up to intimidate them. And that's not peaceful. Here we are. The first one I saw comes from the Twitter account RVA Dirt. RVA, I think, being in this case, usually stands around here for Roanoke, Virginia. Getting dirty in the community and local government, says RVA Dirt. And RVA Dirt tweets out, "Hey, local media outlets, why do y'all," see, y'all, it's local, "why do y'all think this was peaceful?" And what are they responding to? Are they responding to anything in particular? Well, they didn't attach anything. But why do you all think this was peaceful? Because no one got hurt? Everybody was terrified of the 22,000 people in their neighborhoods. Oh, RVA in this case, probably Richmond, Virginia. I usually see it in connection with Roanoke for some reason. But, okay. Richmond, Virginia makes a lot more sense in this case. Everyone was terrified of the 22,000 people in their neighborhoods with guns, some of them not safely carried by any means. I did see some really terrible gun safety out there. If citizens are hiding in their homes, that's not peace. People bragging about carrying 170 pounds, it's a tweet thread now, carrying 170 rounds on their person doesn't do anything to make me feel tranquil. These people were armed for battle because of their misguided notion that Dems are taking their guns. There was a pile of them up against a barrier at one point. No one is taking their guns. Why aren't you all reporting on the fact that many of these visitors to our fine city are from out of state, and when asked what specific bills they are protesting, they don't even know? So it's clearly just a day to gather with other Second Amendment cult members and show off their gun collections. And they got a lot of support in that point. Will Bunch made a similar point, tweeting, "It's outrageous that news organizations called Richmond's gun rally peaceful when it was actually an act of terrorism, with threats of violence to silence critics, keep them off the streets. All the way up to Trump, it's time to fight back against bullies." And he attaches his column. And he makes a point that was also well made by others in his headline. Call Richmond's MLK Day gun rally, what it was, an outbreak of terrorism on American soil. An interesting point, and I did see, I'll have to dig through tweets again to see if I can find it, but somebody made the very good point around Monday or so, saying that, describing what was actually happening, that in a provincial capital, in the middle of an impeachment trial, often a provincial capital, there was an uprising and a threatened takeover of the provincial legislature on that day. And that was quite a good point, and I thought one that deserved at least a moment's attention. Also, another interesting point made about it at the time from Raymond Thomas, who tweets as, this is Majoor Hokie, Majoor, Hokie, Hokie being, among other things, the mascot of the Virginia Tech. So maybe it says he's a graduate student. Doesn't say where, but I guess that means at Virginia Tech. Or maybe he was an undergrad there and is elsewhere. But he made a great point in retweeting the photos from Sebastian Murdoch, who was covering events there for HuffPost, and sending out his pictures of people carrying their guns and all dressed up doing the cosplay thing. Raymond, though, points it out. This is the world's worst cosplay, and here's why. It's also telling, he says, how much of a cultural impact American interventionism in the Middle East has. When gun owners who had never deployed try to emulate U.S. military kit, right down to the shemagh, or keffiyeh, as some people probably call it, as widespread display of the keffiyeh-style headscarf, because, of course, it's been widely used among deployed troops in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. It's just sort of interesting. It's been adopted into a part of the American tough guy look now, not just from deployed veterans, but anybody who wants to look like one. If you want to dress up like a tough guy, the current model is no longer cowboy with a 6-shooter and a big 10-gallon hat. It's pretending to be a soldier, which is interesting in its own right. And, I think Raymond makes a great point in bringing all of that up, that somehow that's now become part of the American, toxic male consciousness, is that the way to look tough is to look like a deployed soldier in the Middle East, and to adopt even the use of the keffiyeh, which is another issue all by itself, because I'm old enough, of course, to remember that when wearing such a scarf or a similar scarf would get you labeled a terrorist. And here we are, hemming and hawing over whether or not to call these guys in the streets of Richmond terrorists. Well, they dress just like what terrorists, or people you used to call terrorists, dressed like. It was extreme enough at the time that Rachel Ray was called out as a terrorist sympathizer for wearing a keffiyeh-like scarf in a photo for an ad that she was running with Dunkin' Donuts at the time, right? She was advertising their new coffee drinks and photographed in a scarf. And I think Michelle Malkin went crazy. She's wearing these are terror donuts. She's in support of terrorism. We should all boycott Dunkin' Donuts. That went really well, by the way. Boycott Dunkin' Donuts because they're pro-terrorist, because they allowed Rachel Ray to wear a scarf that looks kind of like, well, actually the thing that all the right-wing nudniks are wearing now. Just sort of a weird turn in fortunes for the keffiyeh. It wasn't really a turn in fortune, of course. It was gimme terrorism at its heart. It's okay for us to do it, and it's cool when we do it, and it's terrorism when you do it. Very interesting. Anyway, digest that for 2 minutes. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Networks Radio. Okay, so it occurs to me as reconsidering the Jeff Bezos story that the Trump administration might take a cue from all of this and start putting malware in messages that they send to, or, messages from the press operation when they respond to reporters that they don't like. And reporters ask for comment. You can say, I see this file for our response. And they rickroll you right into malware and then download your phone. I don't want to give them that idea. They probably already have it. But, of course, they would never do that. It sort of emerged from the thinking about the Bezos case and whether or not I would open that file if I were in a chat with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And probably the justifying thought right before clicking open would be, well, come on. Not the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia isn't going to do that to people. And I'm sure that there are plenty of people in this country who would think that the President of the United States wouldn't do that to people either. But this president certainly would. And I'm wondering whether is it a rational decision to open an unmarked or even a file that they're lying about that comes from the president himself? Is it rational to open a file that comes from one of the president's top press people? Is that any less rational or any more rational? I'm not really sure. So of course it occurred to me, why aren't they doing this already? I suspect, I don't know, maybe they are doing it already and we haven't figured it out yet, because that people who have been hacked don't immediately suspect that it must have come from someone at the White House, because that would be the least suspect source. And maybe there are people who think, well, sure, the Saudis would do it, but not us. And anyway, I just think we're sort of stuck in this outmoded thinking. Trump has taken us well beyond all that. I guess I wouldn't put it past the Trump administration or Trump himself to do something like this. And, for that matter, okay, fine. We're going to fight today about witnesses and documents and subpoenas in the impeachment trial. And, how about this, right? The Republicans get the word. All right, finally, it's time for you to give in on these subpoenas. We'll deal with the PR of it. Let them have their win. Vote yes on subpoenaing documents from the State Department or the Defense Department or the OMB. The OMB is probably where it would come from, right? And then the House managers will say, fine, great, we issue the subpoena And then we'll answer the subpoena by saying, we agree. Here are the requested documents in compliance with the Senate's subpoena. Go ahead and open them up and have a look at them so that you can figure out what to do with them in prosecuting your case. But instead, of course, it's malicious malware, and it hacks the phones of the House impeachment managers and the entire staff, and they download all their private pictures and attempt to blackmail them into dropping the case. It's fantastical, right? Never happened. Except, I can't know what to tell you. The richest guy in the world and the owner of the Washington Post and Amazon, which is nothing to sneeze at, even as a quasi-governmental organization, you can't entirely rule them out, hacked by like the second richest guy in the world, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, directly. I mean, if in a world where that can happen, anything can happen. So it's irresponsible not to speculate about it. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, so watch out, and nobody open anything, and the information age is over. Thank you. That's the end of it. Let's see. By the way, speaking of the Richmond situation, which is what we were really speaking of before we took the break, Kate Sherrill sends this note. More details emerge about the domestic terrorists caught by the FBI. She sends Larry Sabato's tweet on this subject. Members of the white supremacist group arrested before the Richmond rally wanted to start a civil war. So you don't think the president is going to send you malware, but I also don't think there's going to be a civil war, and we're both wrong. They planned, it says, according to this report anyway, to execute police. That seems bad. Steal their gear, kill people at will, poison water supplies, derail trains. They packed 3 to 5 months worth of food to sustain them in this operation. And I got to tell you, off the bat, that's like, no, they fantasize. They were never gonna. And it may be true that they were incompetent to the task, but again, our initial disbelief does us a disservice, and that's unfortunate. So this is from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. No S, fellas, this really happened. There's another tweet attached to it, by the way, of him. Oh, okay. Well, thanks to the authorities and police for catching them, Larry says. These white supremacists are deadly serious and must be stopped. True. Ironically, the ringleader from Canada crossed the border illegally. Wall on the wrong border? You bet. You got that right. Lots of people have made that observation, but well taken there, Larry Sabato. All right, let me just check this out here. White supremacist group wanted Richmond rally to start a civil war, prosecutors say. Prosecutors sometimes overstate their case, but I don't know if that's the situation here. Let's take a look. Interesting. Well, apparently I guess their upcoming trial will be centered around College Park, Maryland. That's the date line on this for whatever reason. I guess they never made it to Richmond, so they're stopped there. A hidden camera captured members of a white supremacist group expressing hope that violence at Monday's gun rights rally in Richmond could start a civil war, but it was peaceful. Whatever. Federal prosecutor said in a court filing Tuesday, former Canadian Armed Forces reservist Patrick, P-A-T-R-I-K, they took out the C for Canada. The Canadians repossessed his C. They're very embarrassed about this guy. Patrick Jordan Matthews, with one T, no less. Look what's missing. C and T. Conspiracy theory. Q. Look what I found over here. Conspiracy theorist. All right. Former Canadian Armed Forces reservist. Patrick Jordan Matthews also videotaped himself advocating for killing people, poisoning water supplies, and derailing trains. A prosecutor wrote in urging a judge in Maryland to keep Matthews and 2 other members of the base, irony of course, detained in federal custody. Yes, the base. Yes, the Arabic translation, of course, of the base is, as you know, Al-Qaeda. I don't know whether they did that on purpose or not. I do think it's actually just an ironic mistake on their part. And I am waiting for one of the right-wing evangelicals to peel off from the Republican Party if they're finally pushed out and establish the Party of God, which of course would translate as Hezbollah, but never mind that fact. They probably won't figure it out until too late. Anyway, this group of three were arrested Thursday. A day earlier, Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia had cited safety threats in declaring a state of emergency and temporarily banning guns from Capitol Square for the rally. Matthews, a 27-year-old Canadian national, didn't know investigators were watching and listening when he and two other group members talked about attending the Richmond rally in the days leading up to Monday's event, which attracted tens of thousands of people and ended without violence, just the threat of it. Last month, that's a better way of putting it than peacefully. Last month, a closed-circuit television camera and microphone installed by investigators in a Delaware home captured Matthews talking about the Richmond rally as a boundless opportunity. And here's the quote, and the thing is you've got tons of guys who, ellipses, should be radicalized enough to know that all you got to do is start making things go wrong, and if Virginia can spiral out to expletive, full-blown civil war, he said. Well, it can't. That's a miscalculation on your part, sir, and it will cost you. Matthews and fellow group member Brian Mark Lemley Jr., 33, of Elkton, Maryland, discussed the planning of violence at the Richmond rally. Out-of-staters, I knew it. According to prosecutors, Lemley talked about using a thermal imaging scope affixed to his rifle to ambush unsuspecting civilians and police officers, prosecutors said. What a tough guy. He learned what thermal imaging scopes are, and he bought one on the internet. I need to claim my first victim, Lemley said on December 23rd. It was Christmas, for God's sake. And he said, I need to claim my first victim. Someone probably gave him that scope for Christmas as well. According to Tuesday's detention memo, we could essentially, be literally hunting people, Matthews said, according to prosecutors. So these guys are the most dangerous kind of cosplayers. But, braggarts and thankfully not much else because they were stopped. Who knows what lunatics can do? The thing is, you can buy the equipment to pull this stuff off, whether you know what you're doing or not. All right, so we could essentially be hunting people. You could provide overwatch while I get close to do what needs to be done to certain things. It is classic fantasist expression here. But it's against the law to fantasize about that stuff to the point where you're planning it and packing supplies and getting ready to go. Lemley talked about ambushing a police officer to steal the officer's weapons and tactical gear, saying, if there's a po-po cruiser parked on the street and he doesn't have backup, I could execute him at a whim. You mean at whim. At a whim and just take his stuff, according to prosecutors, which has happened. We've seen them do it in Las Vegas and elsewhere. FBI agents arrested Matthews, Lemley, and William Garfield Bilbrough IV. They all sound like dangerous Islamic brownish sort of terrorists. From Denton, Maryland. He's only 19 in this case. On Thursday, as part of a broader investigation of the base, authorities in Georgia and Wisconsin also arrested another four men linked to the group. Detention hearings for Matthews and Bilbrough are scheduled for Wednesday, that's today, at the federal courthouse in Greenbelt, Maryland. Their attorneys didn't immediately respond to the memo filed Tuesday by Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas Wyndham. Matthews and Lemley are charged with transporting a firearm and ammunition with intent to commit a felony. Bilbrough charged with transporting and harboring aliens. Bilbrough's attorney, Robert Bonsib, said Thursday that he was underwhelmed by the prosecutor's arguments for keeping his client detained. Bilbrough was the only one of the three men not facing a firearms-related charge. I think this 19-year-old man should be released, Bonsib told reporters. I don't. Matthews, who was a combat engineer in the Canadian Army Reserve, illegally crossed the U.S. border near Minnesota in August after reporting by the Winnipeg Free Press led to his identification as a member of the base. Investigators believe Bilbrough and Lemley, who was a, quote, cavalry scout, that's what it says, quotes and everything, in the U.S. Army, drove from Maryland to Michigan to pick up Matthews and bring him to the Mid-Atlantic region, authorities said. On January 5th, Matthews and Lemley returned to the Delaware home from a gun range in Maryland and began packing rations and other materials that investigators believe they planned to use during and after the Richmond rally, court documents said. They packed containers with food and supplies before Matthews remarked about needing to bring a gas mask, investigators said. Lemley said He thought he'd have food to last between 3 and 5 months, and that it might be enough till the war is over, according to the filing. The Anti-Defamation League, that 3 to 5 months of food is going to be pretty damning, I think. The Anti-Defamation League said members of the base and other white supremacist groups have frequently posted online messages advocating for accelerationism, a far-right term extremists have assigned to their desire to hasten the collapse of society as we know it. Last Friday, Georgia authorities announced they arrested 3 members of the base on charges they conspired to kill members of a militant anti-fascist group. The arrests came after an undercover FBI agent infiltrated the group and participated in shooting drills in the mountains of northern Georgia, according to a police affidavit. Separately, last Friday, the Justice Department charged a Wisconsin man who they say was also a member of the base. That man is accused of spray painting swastikas, the group's symbol, and anti-Semitic words on a synagogue in Racine in September. I'm unclear there about whether they have a different symbol than the swastika or what. And, after that, a large collection of photos from the rally, which aren't going to do anything to bolster your opinion of the people who turned out for the protest, I can tell you that, or their fashion sense, for that matter. But no more on the story about the kooks from the base, I don't think. But lots of interesting stories. Lots of selective non-prosecution of the law and the emergency measures, by the way, in Richmond, that they too many people, I guess, to arrest, which I guess makes their point again. But apparently against the law to mask your face at these protests in Richmond as well, and that frequently done, both with the kefias and other items. All right, moving right along. Let's see, other things that require discussion, some longer than others. I thought this was rather interesting, too. Back to the impeachment trial for a moment. NYC Southpaw passing this one along yesterday morning. A new letter from the House managers, which is now not new, it's a day old, puts White House counsel Pat Cipollone in the spotlight, calling him outright a material witness to core issues in the articles of impeachment and demanding he disclose what he knows. That's a kind of aggressive thing for House members to be doing in general, though the House usually is the one that speaks up, at least minimally, in these sort of Fahrenheit 9/11 kinds of moments, and it's the Senate that has difficulty going along. Let's take a look at this letter. A 4 pager with a 5th page for signatures, bearing the signatures of Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler, both. Just sort of interesting. Let's run through this one. Dear Mr. Cipollone, in preparation for the trial of Donald J. Trump before the Senate, we write to notify you that evidence received by the House of Representatives during its impeachment inquiry indicates that you are a material witness to the charges in both articles of impeachment for which President Trump now faces trial. The first article of impeachment charges the president with engaging in a scheme to withhold vital American military and diplomatic assistance to pressure the government of Ukraine to announce it would open a sham investigation to help President Trump's re-election. The second article of impeachment charges President Trump with obstructing the impeachment inquiry in the House of Representatives that followed. Evidence indicates that at a minimum, you have detailed knowledge of the facts regarding the first article and played an instrumental role in the conduct charged in the second article. The ethical rules generally preclude a lawyer from acting as an advocate at a trial in which he is likely also a necessary witness. See, for example, ABA Model Rule of Professional Conduct 3.7 and the corresponding rule in the D.C. Rule of Professional Conduct. As the Supreme Court has observed, and their Chief Justice is right here, by the way, tradition, as well as the ethics of our profession, generally instruct counsel to avoid the risks associated with participating as both advocate and witness in the same proceeding. I guess we'll note here another reason why Republicans will fight against calling witnesses tooth and nail. It would undermine Cipollone's whole case. Not that there would be anything that anybody could do about it. because of the environment we're in. These risks are so serious that they can require a lawyer's disqualification. Most importantly, when one individual assumes the role of both advocate and witness, it may so blur the line between argument and evidence that the fact finder's ability to find facts is undermined. Well, the Senate's not going to find any facts here, so maybe, ironically, that undermines their argument. And you're never going to get Roberts to rule on the thing anyway, so. But just another of the issues that if this was taking place either in a real courtroom or under real courtroom rules, you might, in fact, have found yesterday's proceedings delayed until the court could rule on the forced recusal of Cipollone in all of this. But it was not to be. He led arguments yesterday already. And, of course, I guess Roberts, even if he was forced to rule, which he wouldn't be, on something like this, you could say, well, we have yet to see whether there's any real possibility of his being a witness in all of this, and in all likelihood he won't be. That doesn't really actually cure the defect that they're talking about. He shouldn't, by rights, he should be a witness in all this. The fact that they will refuse to subpoena him doesn't now render the conflict inoperable. Anyway, the letter continues, even if the advocate does not take the witness stand, he's addressing this right now, his status as an unsworn witness risks seriously damaging the fairness of the trial. Well, that's out the window anyway. As one court has explained, the problem arises when an attorney was a participant in events to be explored at trial. In that circumstance, the attorney might convey first-hand knowledge of the events without having to swear an oath or be subject to cross-examination. Importantly, the risks of an attorney serving as an unsworn witness have little to do with whether his representation creates a conflict of interest. To the contrary, an attorney providing unsworn testimony is not at odds with his client. There is no conflict of interest. Rather, the detriment is to the opposing party, since the defendant gains an unfair advantage, and to the court, since the fact-finding process is impaired. These issues are directly implicated by your involvement in the events underlying the articles of impeachment. He is, of course, White House counsel. He advised the president, that is, in all of his decision-making, as terrible as it was. As to the first article, multiple witnesses have testified that they raised concerns about the president's scheme with John Eisenberg, the deputy counsel to the president for national security affairs. Mr. Eisenberg reports directly to you in your capacity as White House counsel. One part of this scheme involved conveying the terms of President Trump's solicitation to Ukrainian officials. Multiple witnesses testified that they reported these incidents to Mr. Eisenberg, sometimes repeatedly, over the course of several months. On July 10, 2019, Dr. Fiona Hill, the Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Director for European and Russian Affairs, reported one such incident to Mr. Eisenberg involving a meeting between Ambassador Gordon Sondland and several Ukrainian officials. According to Dr. Hill, Mr. Eisenberg became very concerned when he learned that Rudolph Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer, was involved. Likewise, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman told House investigators that he reported the same July 10, 2019 incident to Mr. Eisenberg. Timothy Morrison, who succeeded Dr. Hill on the National Security Council, testified that he reported 2 additional incidents to Mr. Eisenberg in early September 2019. Interesting note here. So Fiona Hill sees this stuff, reports it to Eisenberg. Fiona Hill essentially booted from NSC, replaced by Morrison. Morrison sees yet more, reports that in September to Eisenberg. Morrison gets the boot. He's now replaced by this guy, Peake, who we read just the other day was escorted out of the White House, and it's rumored that he was somehow got involved with Russian prostitutes and lost control of his cell phone. So they're really picking winners when they get rid of the people who are reporting them, aren't they? Lieutenant Colonel Vindman and Mr. Morrison also both immediately went to Mr. Eisenberg to report President Trump's July 25, 2019 call with President Zelensky. Mr. Eisenberg appears to have informed you of at least some, if not all, of those incidents. Dr. Hill testified that after she spoke with Mr. Eisenberg about her concerns regarding Ambassador Sondland's July 10th meeting, she understood that Mr. Eisenberg later discussed the issue with you as his reporting authority. Public reporting indicates that Mr. Eisenberg also shared Colonel Vindman's concerns with you. Part of President Trump's scheme involved unlawfully withholding federal security assistance until the Ukrainians agreed to his demands. Government officials repeatedly raised concerns about the legality of freezing these funds. House investigators received testimony that 2 OMB officials resigned in part over concerns about the freeze, including an attorney in the Office of the General Counsel. As you know, the GAO recently concluded that the Trump administration violated the Impoundment Control Act by withholding the security assistance after it had already been appropriated by Congress. Your office declined to cooperate with the GAO's inquiry. Your office was also directly involved in potential efforts to conceal President Trump's scheme from Congress and the public. Mr. Morrison and Lieutenant Colonel Vindman both testified that Mr. Eisenberg authorized restricting access to the summary of the July 25th call, which was sequestered on a server reserved for highly classified information. Furthermore, there is evidence that you were directly involved in briefing President Trump about the whistleblower complaint submitted to the Inspector General for the intelligence community and in the decision to withhold that complaint from Congress in violation of the law. According to public reporting, you and Mr. Eisenberg briefed the president about the complaint in August and decided that the complaint could be withheld from Congress. So that was Cipollone's decision, at least in part. And yet here he is as President's defense counsel. With regard to the second article of impeachment charging obstruction of Congress, you are the signatory of the White House's October 8, 2019 letter announcing Mr. Trump's refusal to cooperate with all aspects of the House's impeachment inquiry. You also authored multiple letters in which you directed witnesses subpoenaed by the committees of the House to refuse to testify. Furthermore, you, given your authorship of the October 8, 2019 letter and the nature of your role as counsel to the president, there is reason to believe you were involved in other activities implementing the president's directive to obstruct the House's impeachment inquiry. In light of your extensive knowledge of these key events, your personal representation of President Trump threatens to undermine the integrity of the pending trial. You may be a material witness to the charges against President Trump, even though you are also his advocate. As one court has explained, a lawyer's serving in a dual role of witness and advocate is unseemly and jeopardizes the public interest in continued respect for the legal profession. Oh, well, that's out the window. This ethical rule is routinely enforced because a violation of the advocate-witness rule infects the truth-finding process by confusing the fact-finder, whether judge or jury. When an attorney serves as both an advocate and a witness, there is a substantial risk of introduction of impermissible testimony from the counsel table. For all these reasons, to the extent you plan to serve as the president's legal advocate during the Senate trial proceedings, at a minimum, you must disclose all facts and information as to, the print is getting very small here, as to which you have firsthand knowledge and will be at the time in connection with evidence you present or arguments you make in your role as the president's legal advocate, so that the Senate and Chief Justice can be apprised of any potential ethical issues, conflicts, or biases. Sincerely, Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler. So, points well made, if not necessarily well taken. They likely won't be taken at all. Don't know whether they are planning any particular motion with respect to this, but the fact that the trial has already begun and Cipollone has taken his position as lead counsel, I suppose, largely answers that question. Okay. Well, we're just about out of time here for today. There is, of course, much more that we need to cover, but it's about time. It's time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. That's obvious enough. And two, it's about time, in a couple hours, we'll be back on Trial Watching Beat over at Daily Kos World Headquarters, and I guess we'll turn on the television too, just to keep apprised of things. I don't know whether the fight over the underlying rules is now over and we can expect for them to, essentially lose the vote and adopt the now modified McConnell midnight trial package. That's the most likely outcome. And kudos to the House managers for making the most out of their opportunity to more or less filibuster by amendment. That was more aggressive than I expected them to be. And well done there, because if they had followed the rules as planned by McConnell, all you would get is one vote later on all of the witnesses and all of the subpoenas and all the documents that they wanted. Thumbs up or down, one-time vote only. And they managed to get a 12-hour opportunity to lay out their case in chief. Okay, handing things over now to Justice Putnam, who has a roundup of news from around the country and around the world, much wider than the one we focused on today. Of course, he'll be talking about the trial, but also on the rest of the menu. After trying to ban Muslims, Jeff Sessions is back, I guess, in attempting a comeback Senate bid on religious freedom for Christians of his choosing, among other things. Much more, of course, from around the world. Justice will fill you in on
From
next.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Ah, yes, almost forgot about this one. Remember that Russia gets a brand new government in what Putin calls a, quote, major renewal. And others, of course, call a naked grab to retain power. And you know how much they like naked grabs, these two guys. See you next, tomorrow. I felt like it was Friday. It ain't.